This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we're going to do something a little bit different here over the next several episodes. I'm not even sure how many it's going to be because we've had a lot of response to this. But the situation going on in Afghanistan is obviously insane. It should be dominating the news. It is dominating the news until you get little pockets of COVID news here or there. But this is a start of a series called Botching Afghanistan, where we've invited a lot of alums of the podcast that have at least a tangential relationship to the situation going on in Afghanistan to come on and give their very, very short thoughts on this. So, guys, these interviews are going to be like, 10, 15 minutes. Maybe some of them will be a little bit longer, but these are just quick hitters from people. And there's no better place to start this than with Hollie McKay. So Hollie McKay is an alum of this podcast. She was on episode 188, but she is an author, a journalist, a war correspondent, a humanitarian, and she's the best-selling author of Only Cry for the Living, Memos from Inside the ISIS Battlefield. But she was on the ground and has been on the ground in Afghanistan for the last several weeks. She actually got to watch this situation deteriorate on the ground in real time. So she's in a bit of a precarious situation right now in that she's an American citizen, an Australian native, but an American citizen, and she can't get out of Afghanistan. I just spoke with her last night. Can't really talk about where she was or any of the other stuff that we talked about, but I just want to go ahead and get into these comments. And guys, we're not going to do our normal outro with this series, so we're not going to do the quick resilience boost. I will have the show notes there. You've got to follow Hollie on Substack. You got to follow her on Instagram, and I've also got links to her website and her books and all that kind of stuff. So you will have those links available to you, but we're just going to get right into this content. I'm not even going to be doing this long of an intro on the subsequent episodes with our guests that we have coming up. But without further ado, let's get into it. Hollie McKay, thank you for coming back on Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I know that's been a crazy week for you, crazy several weeks for you. So I just wanted to kind of give you a little bit of space here to talk to our viewers and give us a little bit of an update as to kind of what you've been seeing on the ground there in Afghanistan, because you've been experiencing it, whereas we're all just looking at it on Twitter. So what's going on in Afghanistan? What have you been seeing?
Well, as we can see, Afghanistan's been, at war for 20 years, but what we've really seen since President Biden announced that the US troops were going to be leaving early this year is just an incredible escalation of violence. And just the amount of territory that the Taliban was able to quickly seize, it was just very dizzying and mind-blowing. And then when I got into country, I could not have imagined that really just within a week they would be in power. If someone had told me that a couple of weeks ago, I would have thought they were absolutely crazy. And especially when I came in, things were really normal. And Afghanistan is really one of my favorite places in the world. And in Kabul, everybody was out and just living their life and working. And obviously the situation was very tense and people had big concerns about what was going to happen when the US withdrawal was complete at the end of the month. But other than that, life went on and you couldn't have imagined that this would crumble this way. And it was really just this massive domino effect. As soon as they started to take some of the provincial capitals, that's when we really saw everything just fall. And I think it really just shows you how quickly life can go from normal and then, within 30, literally can be 30 minutes and you've been plunged back into the dark ages and all the rights that you fought for and the education that you acquired and the person that you were for the past 2 decades, that person no longer exists. And it's just been a really heartbreaking thing to wrap my head around.
So I was obviously following you on Instagram for the last several weeks. Everything looked great. Looked like you were having a good time. Was there a flashpoint? Was there an exact moment in time where you could sense, everybody was tense and on edge and at least being, aware of their situation, but where it's like, oh no, things are out of control?
Yeah, I think for me, and I was working in the north of the country with my photographer, Jake, and we both spent a lot of time here and in different conflict zones. And one thing I always stress is you develop a certain intuition about things and things happen and you can't always put your finger on it. And there's sometimes no real root that you can see at the time to why you feel the way that you feel. But we were in the north and we had a great time, and we, just really lapping up, street photography and talking to different people that had fled Taliban zones, and everything was sort of great. And then really within 24 hours, things started to shift. You could see people lining up at the banks, trying to get money out. And at the same time, I was also talking to a lot of sources that I had within government, military, on all sides of the spectrum. And basically, they were sort of assuring me that everything was fine and that, the places were going to hold and everybody was fighting to the teeth. So I guess maybe a little bit naively really, believed that they must have solid information on this. And you felt that shift. I think really it came down to that the afternoon or a few hours before the takeover happened, and there'd sort of been a rumor about the group breaching one of the three sort of front lines. And then we had a taxi driver that we were trying to get to sort of take us to see some displaced people, and he basically said no, he was too scared. And we're thinking, why is this guy scared? What are we missing? And we went out to get some dinner, and the streets were just dead. And, we were at a place that we always go to, and suddenly the television, which normally plays all these crazy, funny soap operas, it was turned off and it was just dead quiet. And we sort of looked at each other and we're like, something's not right. And we both agreed to quickly leave, and we left. And, that was fortunate timing, because had we stayed any longer, it could have been a precarious situation, because immediately some men and motorcycles came in, and that was the Taliban, and that was their very smooth takeover of the area.
So here stateside, obviously the narrative is king. So you have one side of the narrative saying, everything is Joe Biden's fault and, the current administration. Then you have the other side that's trying to put blame all the way back on Bush, but at least Trump. There's a lot of blame to go around right now. People blaming the Afghan army. It's like, hey, at some point you got to fight for yourself. But from what you're seeing on the ground, what are the people saying? Are they disappointed in their own countrymen and in the young men that are supposed to be protecting them? Are they disappointed in America? Is it a hodgepodge of both?
I think it's a hodgepodge. I think most people recognize that there isn't one person to blame in this, that there are multiple factors that contributed to this, and you can't really peg the blame on one particular person. But yeah, I do feel very strongly at the end of the day that the final announcement for that withdrawal did lie with our commander in chief, which is President Biden, and I feel very strongly that wasn't a decision that was sort of a time-based decision rather than a condition-based decision. And I feel very confused why the lack of preparation. I mean, clearly the United States has not been prepared for this onslaught. If you've seen the footage of these poor Afghans, falling from planes and flooding the airport, and my heart breaks for them, because they do have genuine reason to be concerned. But why this wasn't sort of taken into account, and how the US missed the ball so much in being prepared for this. And really, the doubling down of this being the right decision, I'm not sure. I'm not sure why that the president is sticking to that narrative. But I think we can all see that this is an absolute colossal failure, far worse than anything, even Saigon style. And just my heart breaks for the Afghan people, because it's always the ordinary people that suffer. And what we've seen is a lot of the leadership and the warlords and everybody else, cut deals and ran before they were made public and are living safely in other countries, real acts of cowardice, if you ask me. And meanwhile, it's the Afghan people who are left to suffer, and the Afghan people who supported the United States and supported our allies and really believed in this dream of freedom and democracy, and how quickly that was stripped from them. And as much as I can really recognize that we can't, the war had gone on for long enough, and the US had paid a lot of blood and treasure in this war. I don't think it was the right decision to have made right now. And if we look at the history, it wasn't the US troops that were out there in the combat. It was the Afghans that were fighting, and there was a huge amount of problems that needed to be restructured. And I don't know really that they could have been, the government, the centralized system could have been changed, but I think any sort of effort and outcome could have been better than what we've seen now, which is that the Taliban controls more of the country, pretty much all of it, than they did on 9/11. And so 9/11 is going to be a celebration for them, and I think that should be a really sad moment for Americans. And for
it's sad.
allies.
Yeah, it's sad. It's frustrating. It's unbelievable even here as a civilian, but I know you got to go here in just a few minutes. So just, I guess the last question, because a lot of your followers and a lot of my followers that know I know you are like, hey, what's going on? So for you as an American citizen, are you in a place where you're safe now? What is happening with Americans that are on the ground that have basically been told, hey, shelter in place, there's nothing we can do for you?
That's pretty much the situation right now. I think, especially after Kabul fell, it's been pandemonium, absolute dizzying pandemonium. The best thing we can do now is just kind of stay put as the U.S. government formulates its plans and tries to work things out a little bit. But I feel quite safe and in a good place. And yeah, this is an unfortunate part of the work that we do. But I feel very strongly about needing to have been here and to tell the stories of the Afghan people, because that is a semblance of justice to them. And I wish I could put into words to you how wonderful the Afghan people are, and that there's so much more to this country and these people than war and conflict. They're the sort of people that will give you the food off their back, and give the clothes off their back, and give you the last piece of bread, and will take care of you. And even in the lead up to this, I saw I saw very little anti-American sentiment. It was more just, how do I get to America? Please help me. And what we're abandoning these people to is it's a sad day for me.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely incredible to hear these people that still want to come to the land of opportunity, even though there's really no way for them to. So last question here. What, if anything, can we do to help? Because there are GoFundMe's that are popping up, and I'm always a little bit skittish about those. But for you on the ground, what can people do to help?
Well, right now, there are a lot of great organizations that I put a lot of weight into. The ICRC is always doing great things, and then local ones. And I'm going to, if you subscribe to my Substack as well, that I will do a post kind of showing you which organizations have the least overhead and the best ones to support. So check that out, and I'm working on that now. And and really just keep the Afghans in your thoughts, and we can just hope for the best.
Absolutely. We'll certainly be praying for you, and we'll get those links and make sure that they're in the show notes. Hollie, thank you so much for coming back on.
Thank you for having me.